Are you following the flow of the story in the Bible? Let's look at the outline in the chart that I sent you. The Bible starts by setting the stage. God created everything. It was good. But sin quickly entered the scene and affected all of creation. We are part of the problem. We call this the prologue. The largest part of the Bible is about God preparing the world to receive the good news, the gospel. We call this the foundation of the gospel. In Genesis 12, God begins this process by making a promise and letting a man, Abraham, in on the plan. The first part of this process, chronologically, has to do with creating a nation. We call this scene the Great Nation. However, the process of building this nation is slow. There are many steps in its development. The first is with a group of families that will learn to trust God in the face of obstacles. This step is called the patriarchs. The next phase has to do with the structure of this nation. This nation will be divided into 12 groups, known as the 12 tribes. Each tribe is named after one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Though a large and dysfunctional family, God works through them to begin building a nation. This step is called the 12 tribes. A nation needs a population, so this family must grow. Unfortunately, this growth happens during a time when this family finds itself under the rule of Egypt. They eventually are turned into slaves, but even in their oppression, they increase to several million people. This step is called the multitude. Needing to move from Egypt to the location that God promised them, someone needs to be raised up to make this happen. This person, possibly the most famous person in the Old Testament, is Moses. We, like Moses, struggle to feel qualified for God's tasks for us. But that is not the point. God is always ultimately the one doing the work. This step is called leadership. In the next step, God shows that even though He is working out His promise, He still chooses to work through people, even when doing nature-altering miracles. This step is called out of Egypt. A nation needs order to govern it. In addition, since this nation was to be different from all the others, a new way of life needs to be established. God provides the people with rules. This step is called the law. Unfortunately, the people's trust in God and Moses is short-lived. They rebel in faithlessness and disobedience. This results in an entire generation being prevented from entering the promised land. They meander around the wilderness for 40 years. This step is called wandering. This nation cannot continue as nomads. The new generation, led by Joshua, witnesses God's miraculous works as He fights for His people, and they are given a land. Some slide into what they think is only a casual bending of the rules, but find that God takes all sin seriously. Most of the generation follows the Lord faithfully. This step is called the land conquered. In possibly one of the most discouraging times of Israel's history, the people forget God and choose to live however they want, with little to no regard for God's ways. There is a repeated cycle of rebelling against God, being oppressed by other nations, crying out for deliverance, and God sending a judge to rescue them. This cycle repeats itself for hundreds of years and is still being repeated in our lives to some degree. This step is called the land settled. Today we are finishing this step. It is an encouraging story of hope and redemption amid terrible times. It is a story that some of you may be a little bit familiar with. Last week my family and my brother's family visited with my dad, who has recently had a couple of strokes. Knowing that if the strokes went differently, he would not have the ability to communicate his desires, we asked him to think about what he wants if he is unable to care for himself. We wanted to know What setting would make him the happiest as he ages? We then turned our attention to his wife. They've been married for almost 18 years. We asked her to do the same. And very unexpected to me, she broke down and wept. You see, I think in her life's experience, she has struggled to feel like anyone cares about meeting her needs. Her connection to the Garrett family is not as deep as ours, and I think she feels like an outsider. Being in her 70s, she was concerned about what might happen to her if something happened to my dad. We assured her that if she told us what she most wanted in her later years, that we would fight for her in order to make that happen. In today's story, you'll hear about an outsider who finds herself in a very vulnerable position for many reasons. If only someone will show mercy. Does God's law have room for mercy? Is mercy to outsiders a part of God's character? And if so, who are the outsiders in your day? Will the way you feel and act toward them be more in line with the heart of God, or more in line with your own agendas? Sometimes it's difficult for us to recognize someone as an outsider or as vulnerable. We need help from those around us. We need others to point out the outsiders, the vulnerable, to us, and give us the encouragement to be brave enough to treat them the way God would want us to. Now, hopefully, you will find others in your classes who will motivate you to be more like God, more like Jesus.